Welcome to the University of Richmond's Modlin Center for the Arts. At this time, please turn off or silence all cell phones or electronic devices. Due to copyright laws, flash photography and audio or video recording devices are strictly prohibited. In the event of an emergency, please locate the theater exit nearest to you, keeping in mind that it may not be through the door in which you entered. Thank you, and enjoy.
Before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No more moaning, no more moaning, no more moaning, no more moaning, no more moaning over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me.
And before
I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
we who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes.
Until the killing of black men, black mother sons is as important as the killing of white men, white mother sons.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. To me, young people come first. They have the courage where we fail. And if I can but shed some light as they carry us through the gale, we who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes.
Well, the older I get, the better I know that the secret of my going on is when the reins are in the hands of the young who dare
to run against the storm. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Okay, so you all know we're a cappella, so the rest of our rhythm section is out there in your hands and your feet. So if there's anything that you hear and you feel like tapping and clapping, please feel free to do so, okay? Okay. And singing along too, and humming along. To get ready because it's pata time.
Hey.
And if you all have not been up, if you feel inclined to move, because in our traditions, in our many varied traditions, prayer is what we do. It is not just what we say. So here we go. Kuka satebeka,
Nasi pata pata,
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 hear mama,
Nasi pata pata,
hear ma,
Nasi pata pata,
hear mama,
Nasi pata pata,
hear ma,
Nasi pata pata,
kuka satebeka,
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 Nasi pata pata,
hear mama,
Nasi pata pata,
hear ma,
Nasi pata pata,
hear mama,
Nasi pata pata,
hear ma,
Nasi pata pata,
kuka satebeka,
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 Nasi pata pata.
You want to say something? Okay. I hear you.
Freedom is coming tomorrow. Freedom is coming.
coming tomorrow. Freedom is coming tomorrow. Freedom is coming tomorrow.
Get ready, mama, it's time for your freedom.
Freedom is coming tomorrow.
Get ready, mama, it's time for your freedom.
Freedom is coming tomorrow.
Get ready, mama, it's time for your freedom.
Freedom is coming tomorrow.
Get ready, mama, it's time for your freedom.
Freedom is coming tomorrow.
Get ready, get ready, get ready, get ready.
Freedom is coming tomorrow.
So before we say anything, I have to say something.
Go. Let us thank Sisters in Song once again.
Amen.
Adia Blackman Shabazz, Carla Jackson, and Carla is also a graduate of the University of Richmond's Law School, and Veda Suggs Esselfie. I want to thank them because there's no way in which we could have opened the 2020 University of Richmond Wyatt T. Walker Symposium without the songs of freedom and the songs of the diaspora.
Amen.
Thank you. I want to welcome you. My name is Corey Walker. I'm visiting professor in the Jepson School of Leadership Studies and the School of Arts and Sciences here at the University of Richmond, to our formal opening of this year's Wyatt T. Walker Symposium. Yesterday, we had a program with our colleagues at the Race, Religion, and Democracy Lab at the University of Virginia, where we had the opportunity to begin to engage a public conversation on the theme, the politics of black religion in the age of Trump. Today, we continue in some variants of that conversation with our distinguished guest on the theme, race, religion, and politics in an age of extremes. In an April 1979 speech, Wyatt T. Walker stated, "Black religious leaders, that's who we are. As extensions of the people of God that has given us to serve, we are the spiritual heirs of the black religious experience. That uniquely equips us to join the struggle against apartheid. We are no strangers to systemic racism and white oppression. We have known unspeakable cruelties, both physical and psychic, in our sojourn here on the North American continent. It is a miracle of God that we have survived at all. And beyond that survival, are still singing the Lord's song in a strange land." The focus of these 3 days is the unqualified support of the liberation struggle of the peoples of South Africa. Let me be explicit. We are not here about toilets and signs and cafeterias and not even trade unions. The focus of these days and the days ahead must be the total liberation of the people, the children, the land, and the resources. Wyatt T. Walker's declaration was part of a rousing closing speech that he delivered at the Summit Conference of Black Religious Leaders on Apartheid at the United Nations Church in New York in that April of 1979. Walker served as Secretary General of the International Freedom Mobilization Organization, extending his formal entry into anti-apartheid activism, which began when he was appointed to the National Board of the American Committee on Africa in 1973, along with Richmond native Arthur Ashe. Walker's statement is emblematic of his unequivocal stance for freedom that characterized his lifelong activism. His freedom work in Central Virginia and the United States would naturally extend globally to freedom struggles in South Africa and the Middle East. His book, Road to Damascus, chronicles his journey with Reverend Jesse Jackson to secure the freedom of Air Force pilot Robert Goodman from Syria. And his Soweto Diary, published in 1994, charts his experiences during South Africa's first fully democratic election and offers us a sense of Walker's global vision for freedom and justice. Tonight's conversation takes as its inspiration the rich textures of freedom captured in Walker's engaging words as we talk around the theme, the politics of Black religion in an age of extremes. In opening up this conversation, we are reminded that the power of protest and direct action has fueled movements of people from Selma to Soweto in bringing to life a deep humanity that stretches the very limits of community and of human possibility. To take up Walker's example as an invitation for us to consider how such a freedom faith, to appropriate the term of Prathia Hall, is alive in our moment is a deep challenge, but one filled with resplendent possibility. There's no better person to engage in this conversation than the Reverend Canon, Nontombi Naomi Tutu. The challenges of growing up Black and female in apartheid South Africa have been the foundation of Naomi's life as an activist for human rights. Those experiences taught her that our whole human family loses when we accept situations of oppression, and she reminds us that the teaching and preaching of hate and division injure us all. She is the third child of Archbishop Desmond and Leah Tutu. She was born in South Africa and had the opportunity to live in many communities and countries. She was educated in Swaziland, the United States, and England, and has divided her adult life between South Africa and the United States. Growing up the daughter of has offered Naomi many opportunities and challenges in her life. Perhaps one of the greatest challenges she has struggled with is the call to ministry. From early in her life, she would say, "I have my father's nose. I do not want his job." Yet this call refused to be silenced, even as she carried her passion for justice into other fields. The call to preach and serve as an ordained clergy person continued to tug at her. Finally, in her you knew I wasn't going to say that, right?
You can say it.
Finally, in her 50s, she responded to the call and went to seminary. Her professional experiences range from being a development consultant in West Africa to being program coordinator for programs on race and gender-based violence in education at the African Gender Institute at the University of Cape Town. In addition, Reverend Tutu has taught at the University of Hartford, the University of Connecticut, and Brevard College in North Carolina. She served as program coordinator for the Historic Race Relations Institute at Fisk University and was part of the Institute's delegation to the World Conference Against Racism in Durban. She is the recipient of 4 honorary doctorates from universities and colleges in the U.S. and in Nigeria, and she's an ordained clergy person in the Episcopal Church and serves as missioner for racial and economic equity at the Cathedral of All Souls in Asheville. She is a single mother of 2 daughters and 1 son. Let us welcome the Reverend Canon, Naomi Tutu.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, Naomi and I had a very interesting meeting this summer with Victor Anderson, our dear friend from Vanderbilt, at the Haley Farm. And we enjoyed ourselves and had a wonderful conversation. And we said, wouldn't it be nice to have a public conversation like the one we had out on the Haley Farm this summer? And we said that conversation could not be public. So, but I want to welcome you and thank you for accepting the gracious invitation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before we begin formally, you shared a story with me earlier this evening about your first meeting with Wyatt T. Walker. Can you talk to us a bit about when you first met Wyatt T. Walker?
Yeah, and it's from the speech that he gave was where I first met him, was at that conference at the UN in '79, and our college chaplain brought a group of students from Berea to the conference. And, for me, being at that conference was like a breath of fresh air because I had been raised in South Africa at a time when we looked to the U.S. as our sisters and brothers in the struggle. And so I had come to this country knowing that people, particularly black people in the U.S., were fired up about South Africa and about liberation for us and for you. And then I ended up in Berea, Kentucky. And it was like, South Africa? Where is that? What is that? Apartheid? What is that? So when Father Parker said there is a conference being organized by clergy who are trying to remind us as clergy people and as the church that our liberation is connected with that of South Africans, I was excited. And then to get to the conference and to be around clergy who understood that church was not what happened on Sunday, that church was about freeing human beings to live to their God-given potential, and were willing to put their voices out in the public space, were willing to be vilified as political clergy, that you're not really clergy, you're politicians acting like clergy. And so Wyatt T. Walker was one of the leaders of that conference. And I mean, at that point I was young, and I was just, I don't even know how to explain. I was just so relieved. I really was so relieved to be in a space full of especially black faith leaders in this country, and to hear them connect the struggle here to the struggle in South Africa.
What does it mean in a moment now? You talk about that space where clergy are really willing to risk themselves, to place the mission of the church at a mission, at a call for justice and freedom for everyone globally. How do we begin to understand that in a moment where we see the rise of Christian nationalism intense Islamophobia and intense anti-Semitism.
So, there is good news and bad news, and it's the same thing. They're both the same. And that is that this isn't new, right? This isn't new where we have people using faith as a way to oppress, to dehumanize. Why do you think they had the prophets? Because there were religious leaders in their time who were saying, yes, king, no, king, whatever you want, king, and yeah, God is speaking whatever you want to hear, right? And my favorite prophet is Amos. And Amos's conversation with Amaziah, to me is the conversation that we who say that we recognize our faith is about a lived freedom for God's people should be having with those who are saying, yes, king, whatever you say, you must be anointed because you are the king. And Amos is saying, you know what? That's your problem right there. You are calling this temple the king's temple. There is no temple that belongs to any human being. The temple is the temple of the Lord. And if you had been doing what you were supposed to be doing, God could have left me on my farm. Oh. But because you're not, here I am. And I think that to me is that's kind of like foundational for us to say, what does it mean to be faith leaders in a time when our faith is being used as a weapon to kill, right? What does it mean to say that we hold on to a belief in a God who created and looked at her creation and said, it is good? Because that God looking right now, are we giving God much to say it is good about? And yet I think there are people, and that's what I draw from people like Wyatt T. Walker is that there are always voices, if we pay attention, who are calling us back to our true faith, to what it means to be children of a living God.
Naomi, you have a distinctive voice.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
I thought I was I'm messing up the mic, aren't I?
No, you're calling us to a responsibility and what Wyatt T. would call faith as risk-taking. Mm-hmm. It seems that there's a way in which that voice is formed in your experience. Mm-hmm. Talk to us a bit about growing up in apartheid South Africa that helped shape your distinctive voice.
And I like to tell people that that if you talk to any Black South African, there is a story for them, a personal story that is their entry into apartheid, right? Their realization of what this system is. And I have two. One that isn't even about apartheid, it's more about the Christianity of missionaries, right? And that one is a really quick one, and is the township that I was born in, Krugersdorp, which is, Muncieville, which is a township of the town of Krugersdorp, completely Black Anglican church. Everybody in the church was Black. Everybody. Sometimes we had a white priest there, but every single person, because of apartheid, right? And I remember sitting in that church as maybe a 3-year-old and looking at the depiction of God in that church. And God was white. And not only was God white, but everybody else around God was white, right? So I'm like, so how are we sitting here praising this person and saying this person loves us, who the only people he looks like are those who come to oppress and kill in our community? So, and for me, that was a question, and it was a question that I posed to the greatest theologian I knew, my grandmother, who, who is the reason I was in church. But it was a conversation that we continued to have through my life. But the really big realization of apartheid for me was, as my father was teaching at the seminary in the Eastern Cape, the Federal Seminary, which was a seminary that had Presbyterian, Methodist, Anglican, and so they had some classes in community, but then each of the denominations had their own little gathering places with their chapel and all the rest of it. And so we were the only family who lived at St. Peter's, the Anglican section of the seminary, because the rest of the lecturers were members of the Community of the Resurrection. But on that federal seminary were many families living, and some with children our age. And all those children were white, the families were white, and all those children got up in the morning and went to school down the street and came home in the evening. And my brother, my sister, and I was 6.5 at the time, had to go to boarding school in a neighboring country in order to get the kind of education that they were getting, just waking up in the morning and going. And not only that, so the trip took us 2 days for my parents to take us from the Eastern Cape to Swaziland. And on that journey, I remember that my parents had, first of all, we had to carry all our own food because there were not places to sit and eat on the way. But also that my parents had mapped out which gas stations would allow Black people to use the bathroom. And so our trip was focused on those places where we could stop to use the bathroom. Now, all the gas stations along the way would let us get gas and spend our money, but only a certain number would allow us to use the bathrooms. And so for me, as a 6.5-year-old, trying to understand how is it that 6.5-year-old gets to live with her parents, and I have to spend 9 months of each year in Swaziland, away from my parents. But also, how is it that to make that trek, that it is such a dehumanizing experience to be thinking about, are we going to make it to the next bathroom?
Wow. So from the Christianity of missionaries to trying to make it to the next bathroom, your life is a life of travel and trying to begin to develop a geography of this systemic system of racial separation. All of a sudden, you're a teenager and you're dropped in to Kentucky. Different contexts, there's some similar cute clues going on that you have to pick up on. How does a child born in South Africa find her way in Kentucky in the United States in the 1970s?
In the 1970s, yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I didn't think I was going to Kentucky. That was the first thing. Well, I thought I was going to Kentucky, but I thought Kentucky was close enough to New York that I would be able to commute to school, okay? So there was an issue of geography, as you say, really practical geography. But also there was, Berea is a beautiful place, don't get me wrong. I had an amazing experience at that place and made lifelong friends. But as I said, initially, that to get to a place where I had a picture of America, right? And it's not the picture about Hollywood and, I had a picture because I was raised in a place of struggle, and I had a picture that everybody was Malcolm X and Angela Davis, or at least their children, right? And so I came so excited to be in this place and to be in connection, because seriously, I don't know that Americans know how much the story of the struggle in this country kept us going in the struggle in our country. I don't know if people recognize that. And so to then find myself in a place where people really did not know where South Africa was, didn't have any idea about apartheid, and to me appeared to be not interested in the connections between our struggles. I came to understand it at some point, being in that place, how that happens. Because I was the one person on campus who was a member of the Black Student Union and the African Student Association. And that was a division, that was an important division. And I think that it's a division that, to me, is emblematic of how we are divided, right? And so when I would talk to people in the Black Student Union, African American, they would talk about, I don't want to be identified with Africa. And then I looked at the pictures of Africa, and I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't want to be identified with that either. So like, it's starvation, it's civil war, or else it's all the Africans running away and only the one white Tarzan standing up to the evil, the cruel, the animals, and meanwhile the Africans are all running crazy. And I was like, okay, I'm not African either, given that depiction of Africa, right? But then in the African Student Association, I would be talking to my brothers and sisters from the continent who talked about their parents telling them to stay away from African Americans because the picture they had of blacks in America was the pimps, the thieves, the drug dealers. So why would you want and I finally, I know other people have realized it, but for me, it finally clicked in that time of being able to go to New York to this conference, that part of our struggle is being about telling our own stories to one another, right? To letting each other know each other from our own mouths, from our own songs, from sharing our own stories, our own struggles. Because if we were waiting for the mainstream media or Hollywood films to tell us about each other, we would continue to be suspicious of one another and to be able to be played as either that exotic African when you're in Kentucky, or if you're an African American in apartheid South Africa and given honorary white status, right? That to accept that
You're not
as accept that as some kind of acclamation. And that is, I think, the importance of faith leaders like Wyatt T. Walker, like Fred Williams, who consistently preach the gospel of liberation, but also preach the gospel of know your story, damn it, so that you can move forward.
All right. Naomi is bringing it tonight. I want to extend this line of thinking, Naomi, because what we're seeing in our contemporary moment, we're in a moment where we have a president occupying the White House who is referred to African countries, African nations, as in the derogatory sense, countries. He's also just recently passed a ban of a number of Muslim countries and banned the largest Muslim nation on the continent and the largest nation on the continent, Nigeria. The question to the faith community, the black faith community, is how do we respond in this moment? How do we build those bonds of solidarity, particularly when there's a neo-nativist movement amongst some black clergy? Hashtag ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery, that really forces a nationalist identity to the forefront. To say that any reparations first you have to be an American citizen, and you have to trace your genealogy to the American nation state and the American empire. How do we build bonds of solidarity in this particular moment that you're talking about, those bonds that Wyatt T was so influential in forging?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, we have to, you know, you're saying, what do faith leaders say? How do they stand? First, let them say something, right? Let them say something at least, that this is not, I mean, what has been overwhelming to me is the silence from our faith leaders in the face of these kinds of actions and statements by the US president. And, and you know, I mean, the descendants of slaves thing, I'm just saying, people, how are we fighting about who's going to get something when we haven't got anything? Right? They aren't even talking about reparations to us. So how are we saying you can't get any when there isn't any to be got? Right? Let's first talk about how do we build a coalition to get that reparations.
That's right.
And the truth is that it is in forging together that we find any change happening. When we look back, I mean, I hate being this person who says, look back and look how wonderful it all was. But the truth is that if you look at the independence of the African continent, if you look at the strengthening of the civil rights movement, that you can tie it back to the Pan-African Congresses that took place, that brought together leaders from the black community here and leaders from the African continent. And it was when we were working together that we saw results. And again, when we talk about apartheid, it is when we have the clergy, we have Trans-Africa, we have the Black Congressional Caucus, all saying, we are putting South Africa on top of our agenda, and America, damn it, you are going to have to do that too, because we're not going to let you talk about anything else without talking about that. And the reality is that when we have leaders, both faith leaders and political leaders, who recognize that trying to fight over crumbs that haven't even fallen off the table yet leaves us all starving. And I seriously don't understand how we can be a people who come from leaders like this and then be arguing about nothing.
Yes.
you know, that we are arguing about, oh my gosh, that we are arguing as though somebody has handed a check and we're trying to decide who's going to get the money. There is no check. And if we're going to get anything, it is going to come from our combined work. It isn't going to come from allowing ourselves to be divided and conquered once more.
All right. You mentioned the great Pan-African Congress movement, Sylvester Williams, Barrister Sylvester Williams in 1900, joined by Anna Julia Cooper and W.E.B. Du Bois, and of course, we remember that 1945 Manchester Conference. And in both of those moments, we see these conferences, the convening of the African world, both continental and diasporic Africans coming together in a world deeply fractured and cleaved along lines of ethnicity, along lines of nationality, along competing sovereignties. In our contemporary moment, we occupy a similar space. We see the global rise of new authoritarian regimes. We see democracy taking on a phase where it has lacked legitimacy in certain contexts, and in other contexts, it is also masking certain aspirations of global white supremacy, new formations of white nationalism, both in Europe and in the Americas. And we see it spreading across the world. How do we begin to think through, or how do we begin to understand this global rise of white supremacy in our moment, these global divisions? But yet there's still, even in those moments of division, there's still a hope for not only bringing together the African world, but also creating a robust world of freedom and justice for all.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I always tell people that my father used to love to say that he's a prisoner of hope, and they came up where I'd be just like rolling my eyes. I'm like, you know, the hope is really thin right now. The prison is huge. But and he would say, and the hope might be thin, but the hope is still there. And that is what keeps us fighting against these prison walls. And I am struck in this country. You know, right now I'm reading a book that is called Dying of Whiteness. And I can't remember the author's name, so I apologize. But he's looking at the ways in which white supremacy has taught white people that being white is in and of itself a benefit, and that is able to then sell them into voting away things that do them good on the basis that you're taking it away from those people. And you know, those people look like us, right? And I mean, and he actually documents a story of a man who is dying in Tennessee, dying because he cannot get health insurance to deal with what seems to be something that could have been curable. He is dying. And yet when the author asks him about, well, wouldn't it make sense for your state government to have done the Medicaid expansion? And he was like, no, we don't want to give those people anything for free. There is a level of sickness in that's beyond the physical sickness, right? There is a level of sickness that you cannot even look at your own life and recognize your connection to another human being, because you have been told that the thing that you hold on to is that your white skin gives you something above people of color, even as you are dying because of white supremacy, right? And for me, the hope, the story, again, goes back to our foremothers and fathers who kept saying to white people in South Africa, to white people in this country, that the truth is, you will never live fully until we live fully. And to hold in front of them, even in the face of, them holding on fiercely up till death, the idea that white skin gives them some kind of protection, that hold before them the story that they say is theirs, the story that is in the gospel, right? That they brought to us, that they taught us, and yet they seem to have forgotten it. And I mean, if you listen to preachers like Wyatt T. Walker, like Fred Williams, like Martin Luther King, like even my father, what they are saying is, you have forgotten what the kingdom of God is. You have given up on the kingdom of God for scraps from the table of a white God who doesn't love you, but because you think he looks like you, he's going to treat you better but he is doing nothing for you any more than he is doing for us. So come with us to the God who created everyone in her image and sees herself in each one of us, right? That is the hope that I have, is that we come from a tradition of preachers who preached like that on a day, not a weekly basis, on a daily basis. They preach like that in the pulpit. They preach like that on the street marching. They preach like that in prison cells. They preach like that at hospital beds. They preached their lives around a God who is a God of liberation.
All right. Yes.
I know.
That's a lot.
I get in the pulpit. I start getting in the pulpit.
There's so many. Naomi and I were talking earlier, and we were talking about our usage of social media. And I said,
he's gonna embarrass me now.
I said, Naomi, you have this beautiful, your work, and folks are always tagging you on Twitter. And she was like, well, sometimes I use it, I don't. But if you're on Twitter, open up your programs. Naomi's Twitter handle is in there. And for this symposium, we're using the Twitter handle #URWTW2020. #URWTW2020. Because we're going to tweet that you're fighting for crumbs on the table and we're all starving. We got that one written down. You talk about this story, the richness of this story, that this can't be the end of the story. Mm-hmm. I believe that's from your grandmother, mm-hmm. that this can't be the end of the story. And your work in Asheville, and I think about what you're doing in the Episcopal Church and what you're doing at All Souls Cathedral. I think of the work of Reverend Barber and the Poor People's Campaign in this moment. Mm-hmm. How do we begin to knit together and weave a tapestry for that new story in a moment where we may feel that hope is thin mm-hmm. and its mm-hmm. prison is large?
Mm-hmm. And it's happening. Mm-hmm. It is happening. The stories are connecting, and people are connecting with the stories. And I think that we, again, that's why I said I don't want to romanticize our history. That we look back and we see huge marches, and we listen to wonderful speeches, and we forget that people are doing that today. There are marches, there are amazing speeches by young people who are holding up to us their vision of a just world. So the work is out there. I think what we have allowed ourselves to fall into the trap of believing the media depiction of what is going on in the world, so that we might not watch Fox, but we are constantly listening to people telling us what they're saying on Fox, right? And then we're looking at all these polls that are saying, you know, people love this president and people agree with this president and faith leaders, blah, 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 right? And faith leaders flock to the White House. And I'm looking at those faith leaders and I don't know one of them. You know, they are not people who are ministering to people I know. They are not people who are feeding the hungry in the places that I go to. They are not the people who are standing up and saying, we are preaching a God of love. So I think that one of the failings, I think our biggest failing is not paying attention to one another, to the amount of work that is going on, to the way that the movement is being built. It doesn't look like the movement of our youth, well, my youth, your very, maybe not even born youth, but that it doesn't look like that, and so maybe because it doesn't look like that, we're confused. But if you go into any town, I mean, the very fact that the Cathedral of All Souls in Asheville, North Carolina, has a missioner for racial justice, I mean, that's nothing but God, really. And that is people's realization that as the church and as the Cathedral Church of the Diocese of Western North Carolina, we must take a stand against the hatred and division that is being blasted from the pulpits that get TV coverage. And the fact that we don't get TV coverage should not be a source of fear or disappointment to us. I go back to Amos and Amaziah. Amaziah had the temple. Amaziah was getting paid to be a prophet. He had it going on. He had the ear of the king, that he told the king, Amos is dangerous. You need to do something. And Amos was, I'm a farmer, but let me tell you, God is watching what you are doing. And you can say what you like to me, and you can do what you think you like to me. But that is not the end of the story.
All right.
And that was my grandmother's point, was it's not even that this can't be the end of the story. Hers was, this is not the end of the story. So you don't look at apartheid South Africa and say, this is God's plan for South Africa. This is not the end of the story. If we are a people of faith, if we actually read that gospel and pay attention to what it says, there is no way this is the end of the story. And I said this last night at Purdue, that I am astounded at who are the people who we are allowing to be the representatives of Christianity particularly in this country. Because, you know, I said, because when you listen to their discourse pulls from the Hebrew scriptures, and in a way that Jewish people don't. You know, Jewish people have been interrogating their scripture from the day they got it. There are different interpretations of what each, but these ones come and say, it says in Deuteronomy, and that's what it means, and it meant that then, and it means that today. So, but then they stop there, and then they go to the epistles of Paul. They've forgotten that bit in the middle, the gospel, that we are called Christians, not Paulians. We are Christians, and that message is clear. That person in the gospel was clear. Jesus spoke about poverty, about oppression, about giving to God our lives. That was what Jesus talked about. Jesus did not talk about homosexuality, about transgender people, about all of these things that we are being told that as Christians, that's what we need to focus on. When? Where? And don't get me wrong, Paul had some interesting things to say, but the more I read those epistles, the more I'm like, now that's the original white mansplainer right there. The man who was nowhere to be found when these things were going on was persecuting Christians, and then once he got saved, he knew better than anybody else what Jesus had been saying. Right?
Right.
And that is the basis of the faith that says it is the voice of Christianity in this country.
Well,
we need to do something. I mean, maybe send people some Bibles with just the gospel. Right? You might have missed this part. Here you go. Read it a couple of times and then get back to me.
That could be dangerous. Thomas Jefferson had the Jefferson Bible, which was only what he liked about the Gospels and the words of Jesus. So there may be no guarantee there.
That is true. Point taken.
I'm very interested in your call for liberation and speaking this full message of faith in the world, of Christianity in the world. And I'm reminded of a statement by Wyatt T. Walker, and it's an undated manuscript that we have in the collection here at the University of Richmond. It's under the theme, The Womb of Revolution. And Wyatt T. writes, serious revolution is total. It maintains a question mark over every aspect of society. No institution is taken for granted. In a moment where we've seen this rise in populism and these movements that want to erase so much and create these monstrosities of nationalism and of white supremacy and the ways in which the gulf between the haves and the have-nots seems to want to become permanent, as if this is the order of things. How do we catalyze this sense of revolution that Wyatt is talking about, or this sense of liberation that you're speaking of, and this absolute sense of freedom that connects new possibilities for human being and belonging in the world?
Are you going to give me a Nobel Peace Prize if I answer that one?
Oh, of course.
I mean, really, I will be preaching the same sermon, because for me it is realizing that and speaking to a God who calls for our wholeness. That if, I used to have this, because I was that child, that I would have this conversation with my father because, he had this certainty about God's word and the liberating message that was throughout history in God's word. And I would say to him, and yet, you know, when you listen to Dutch Reformed preachers, they're saying exactly the same, that they have an absolute faith in a God who created the world for separation. So how is it y'all are talking about the same God, or at least you're talking about the same faith? You're all saying you're Christian, and you are talking about diametrically opposed things, it seems to me. And he would always say the same thing, and that was, you know, if you listen to what it is that Jesus preaches, and you can take what I'm saying as true or not true, but the fundamental thing that Jesus goes back to over and over and over is, if you mistreat a brother or sister in this world, don't claim that you love God. You cannot claim the God who created this world and look at your brother and sister as someone less than you. So whether it was Jesus saying, if you get to the altar and you realize that you have an argument with your brother, leave your sacrifice, go back, fix that thing with your brother, and then come back to the altar. Or Jesus saying, you know, don't be looking at the mote in your brother's eye when you got a big old log sticking out of your eye. Or Jesus saying, at the end, I will say, come to me, you saw me when I was naked and you clothed me, you visited me in prison. So if you say that you are a Christian, there is no way that you can be in any way preaching hate. There is no way in any way that you can be preaching about somebody being less human than another human being. So that to me is the catalyst for us as people of faith in calling the faith community and therefore our larger world to an acceptance, a belief that liberation is God's plan for God's world.
All right. Thank you. Well, we can continue all night. And Naomi is a wonderful conversational partner. This is a very, very easy conversation. It's just sitting here talking with an old friend. But what I want to do is invite you to join this conversation. We still have a few moments, and I want to make sure that we offer you an opportunity to engage our distinguished visitor who has so much.
Saying distinguished.
Okay, well, Naomi. If you want to ask a question, comment, we have Kayla. Yep, I can see you beyond the light.
Hi, I'm Kayla. I'm a junior here at the University of Richmond, and I just wanted to ask your opinion about the role of young people. And I've noticed a lot, especially at Richmond, I've seen a lot of young people going back to the church, but it's a different type of church. Like, it's more accepting, it's a lot more lenient. It's kind of getting rid of respectability politics, politics of politeness. And I just wanted to talk to you about kind of the cynicism that we get from the older generation, or like you said, this belief or like myth that we aren't as involved, that we aren't taking steps toward liberation, and that we're not in the church.
And you're right. You are in the church, and one of the things that is striking for me is that if you look at the depictions of young people that we see in the media, the things that are highlighted about young people in the media what are the things that are selected to show us that young people are involved in? Those things are not chosen by young people to show us, right? It's my age group that is showing us how terrible these young people are. And we've forgotten that that was us 50, 60 years ago. That's exactly what they were saying about us. I mean, my grandmother was horrified I went to church in pants. She just was like, you are going to hell. There is no salvation for you, right? And yet, it feels like it's just like some kind of, maybe we're just jealous. Maybe we want to be young again and to try out the things, try out church in a different way, in the way that you are. And but I am so encouraged by the kind of leadership and challenge that young people are putting to our churches. And it's a worldwide thing. When I was growing up in South Africa and going to churches in black communities, it was a source of pride to be able to do the reading and the prayers in English. That was an amazing young person who can read the Bible or do the prayers in English. And I am seeing young people in South Africa, in our churches, claiming back our African languages as God understands Xhosa. She's not dumb. I can pray in Xhosa and God will know. I can read the Bible in Tutu, and that is, and so I think that maybe there is a part of us that wishes that we could be doing this new way of worship ourselves, this new way of being in the world ourselves. But what I have realized talking to people my age is that actually when we are amongst ourselves talking about the youth and the leadership of young people in our faith communities, we are always amazed and proud. And so I think there's something about being an older generation that we don't want to give kids a big head. And that's a very black thing, right? We do it in South Africa too. That when somebody says, "Oh, your child is so smart," oh, hell no, she's not. You should see, she can't even wash dishes, right? But that when we are on our own, we're like, yeah, she is so smart. She is going to change the world. But we don't want you to hear us saying those things. And that is something that we have to work on ourselves as a community. And Joy DeGruy says that is part of post-traumatic slave syndrome, that if our young people were outstanding, they would be sold off in slavery. So yeah, you're going to say, "Oh no, she's lazy." So there's a historic reason, right, for the way. But we need to recognize that we are on a path for full liberation, and we can embrace it publicly and encourage publicly our young people to explore a faith from a place of freedom.
Yep. One more.
My question is, as the Missioner for Racial and Equity, what are some of your tasks that you do?
Woo! Yes. So Corey walked into the church this summer, and I was like, "There's a black man in our church," right? Because it is not a very diverse, racially, culturally, ethnically church, and so the role of the missioner is mostly to provoke questions of what is the status, what is it as a predominantly white, a centrally placed church, and a church that is the cathedral of the diocese, what is it that it stands for and that it shows in the world about the church? And how do we challenge white supremacy in the church just by how we act as a church, right? And I mean, and some of the things that I do are pretty small things. Like I was telling somebody that just asking, let's think about where we source the services that we need for the church. So we have a community center and it has a yard, and the landlord called and said that the grass needed to be mowed. And so I said, you know, who has a lawn service around here? And I was like, and they gave me names, and I was like, oh, are there any black people in this list? And there weren't. And so I was like, so black lawn service, well, how do we source those? And I just put in a couple of calls to some black people in the community and said, and you know, within half an hour, I had 5 black lawn service people. But I mean, and it would seem like an irrelevant thing, right? But it is about questioning how we appear in the community, how we live as the church. Are we a community that fosters respect for people of color, black, Latino, Asian, in the way that we welcome people into our community? How do we worship? Do we worship in a way that is welcoming? Those kinds of questions, that's what I'm doing.
Well, Naomi, you're raising not only disturbing questions, but liberating questions.
Thank you.
And in the true tradition of Wyatt T. Walker.
Oh, wow.
Imagine in 1979, you're meeting Wyatt T. at the UN, at the United Nations Church. And in 2020, you formally inaugurate our 2020 Wyatt T. Walker Symposium to honor his memory, his lifelong work that continues to live through you.
Oh, my goodness.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us as well. And please join us tomorrow, where we will have a full day of the symposium beginning at 9 a.m. And we'll welcome 12 distinguished scholars from across the country and conclude with a keynote lecture delivered by Jonathan Walton, Dean of the School of Theology, Dean of the School of Divinity at Wake Forest University. Good evening, and we'll see you in the morning. Right here. Everything is all right here, so you don't have to go anywhere, even if it snows.
Thank you.